Thank you so much for joining us today, Shirin and Megan. Really, really appreciate your time. And y'all are some of the I hate to use the word influencer because I know it's sometimes it's a little bit overused, but y'all are really influencing folks and helping folks as experts, not just on social media but tactically in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. So really appreciate it. Why don't we just take a quick second to introduce ourselves and just tell folks a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive into the really fun Grammarly sort of case study here today. Megan, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I'm a product marketing consultant. Shireen and I both are. But I have been in marketing for about 14 years, product marketing specifically for about half of that. I've been the first head of product marketing into a couple of different startups. And now I kind of take all those skills and frameworks and lessons learned and apply those for my clients on a fractional and a project basis.
Awesome. How about yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen and excited to be on this show. And as Megan said, I'm also a product marketing consultant. I've been doing product marketing in a consulting capacity about 5 years now, but I've been in product marketing 12 years and worked at various B2B SaaS companies prior to starting consulting. And then now, as Megan said, I work with a variety of clients across industries, so pretty much vertical agnostic around different product marketing projects, everything from positioning and messaging to content, which we'll talk about today, sales enablement, all of it.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So Grammarly hired y'all to come in and do a couple things, but really refresh and create 14 sales assets, which included like one pagers, slides, talk tracks, right? What it sounds like to me, or sales conversation tracks. And there were a couple kind of key components to that project. Why don't we kick off with just kind of starting to think about, like, how did you approach the project? What was kind of the need at a high level? I know they have an internal product marketing team, so this was a little bit more about helping assist that existing team.
Yeah. Shireen, do you want to kick it off since you handled
Oh,
those
sure.
initial conversations?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, they have an existing product marketing team. So this was more a resource constraint on their end as far as needing some support to get this content off the ground and running. And as you said, some of it was refreshes of existing pieces that they had, and some were new. They also have two business units, so Grammarly for Business as well as Grammarly for Education. So the first part I'll talk about, maybe the first phase we'll all talk about, is that onboarding phase. So this is critical no matter what kind of project it is. So this is the discovery and onboarding, no matter what project is. And I think, Megan, it's the same for you, but I'll let you speak to that. I always do a discovery phase. I think no matter what you're working on, we have to understand the business as best as we can. We have to understand the product as best as we can and get to know the people in the company as best as we can, because we are going to be leveraging them. This engagement was about 3 months, I would say, and we're going to be engaging with them throughout that project. So we really kicked it off with discovery calls internally. Sometimes we also do this with customers, but we didn't do this with Grammarly. And of course, our questions and our discovery phase did, of course, focus a bit on the content that we're going to be creating. And what I mean by that is we had to get to know the persona. What are some of those key messages we want to get across? How are sales teams using these assets today? What's working? What's not? So this was a really critical phase of the work. And it's important that the client also understands how critical that is, because it may seem like, oh, there's 2 to 3 weeks that we're not actually delivering anything, but that's okay. We have to do this so that we can successfully deliver the work after that. So that's kind of how we
Yeah.
started. Megan, you'd add to
And
that.
that, and just real quick, that is something, that onboarding kind of qualification slash discovery, right?
Yeah.
Um, Process, that is something that you've done after you've already secured the project. And is there anything that you do to sort of set the expectation, like this is what the beginning is going to be like, so
Yeah.
we don't have one of those situations where folks are like, where the heck are the deliverables, or they don't understand the scope?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So discovery phase, yes, is when we've kicked off and post signing the scope. So it was after we signed with Grammarly. However, I talk about that in the initial calls with the prospect. I define it very clearly in the scope documents that this first phase is discovery and intake. It's approximately going to take a couple weeks. It usually is 2 to 3 weeks, I would say. Longer if you're speaking with customers, just because of scheduling and all of that. But 100%, I set that expectation. I mean, it's super important they're on board with that. And if they're not, we might not be aligned. Not like right away, we're not aligned to work together, but I think it's important to have the clients buy in on the process.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there can be this perception, especially when someone's having us come in and create assets, like just create a lot of content that we can just kind of plug ourselves in like an outlet. And that's just not necessarily how the process works. So I really like that we always try to set that tone and say, hey, we're going to create all these assets for you. But in order for us to do a good job, here's what we need to do up front. And then that really comes into play later in the process, and it helps us to be more efficient, more effective. It helps it make sure that, we're not doing multiple rounds of reviews because we've already set those expectations and we understand what we're doing up front instead of just kind of muddling our way through and learning as we go.
Now, how did you help them understand here's what we're going to prioritize? Because to
Mhm.
your point, there are a lot of different assets, right? That could be worked on, a lot that could be sales enablement oriented, but some that even overlap with other functions. How do you help them think through that? And then also, like, how did you sort of influence, hey, you know what, these are the ones that we really, after we've done the discovery, should really focus on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we first, Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, asked them to
Mhm.
prioritize the list. So they gave us a list of 14.
Yep.
And we need to start somewhere. So how do we prioritize this and where do we start? And I'm pretty sure we split that prioritization between the two business
Hmm.
units
Yep.
as well. So we
Mhm.
had a few in each. One thing that was interesting is the priorities did shift a bit through the engagement.
Mhm.
So that is not uncommon. I think as you start working with a client, priorities can shift. And we just had to be careful from our perspective to I mean, it's the term scope creep, but like not even like, oh, we don't want
Yeah.
to do this because we have this, but just we would be very vocal and transparent. That's a very important value, for me at least, and I know for Megan as well, because we work together a lot, is to say, hey, we want to deliver our best work, but if we focus here because a new priority came up, we're not going to be able to focus here. So is that okay? Are we replacing this item, this content piece with this one? So we were very transparent about that through the process. And the last thing I'll say is, as far as how we prioritize or how I'll answer that with, anytime I think you hire a consultant or someone outside who's not full time at your company, it's a force function kind of that you need to prioritize and really pick what we're going to focus on. For we're not on your team 40 hours a week.
Mm.
So you only have us for a distinct period of time, whether it's content or like a positioning project. You still need to really prioritize what we're focused on. So I think organizations almost like that because they're forced to go back to their team, and that's what they did, to say, okay, we have Shirin and Megan for this period of time. And Megan was driving a lot of the day-to-day work. So let's say she was working about 20 hours a week on the project. What do we want to absolutely make sure we get done, and what needs to get done first versus like a month from now?
Yeah.
Um, Now,
Exactly.
Megan, I was going to ask a quick question about like any sort of frameworks that you used or way of thinking around end results that they really wanted to see
Mhm.
from the actual deliverables, but also any sort of metrics or analytics that maybe they had an expectation for.
Yeah, for sure. So I think back to the prioritization, I kind of thought about that as we were prioritizing. So the way that we prioritized is we put together the list for them and said, this is how we would prioritize it if it were just us. What do you think about that? And then they came back and moved some things around. And then as we kind of moved through, we would hit roadblocks or whatever it may be. And we met with them on a weekly basis and had our ClickUp board and all of those different things where we could show them, here's the progress that we've made, here's where we're blocked. And I think the way that we prioritize those to begin with really had to do with these deliverables that we're prioritizing first. We think you're going to get the most juice out of these. So let's prioritize kind of some of these that are like a little bit of maybe a heavier workload, but a bigger payout. So those could be things like they wanted specific slides for specific personas. And we felt like, hey, this is something you really should get in the hands of your sales team as soon as possible. Or, there were launches that we were prioritizing some one sheets for. So we felt like, hey, let's prioritize those first. So this isn't really a blocker here. As far as data goes, we didn't, to my knowledge, use a ton of that in the process. But in previous projects like this, there's totally the ability or like the necessity to kind of pull some of that in and say, hey, sales team, we see that you've used this one sheet, so many times. It's time to give this a refresh, but we're going to deprioritize this other thing. Maybe we just know that the team doesn't use slides. So we're not going to prioritize the slides as heavy as a one sheet or a video or something along those lines. I think that definitely can and should be part of the process.
Now, is there any sort of like old or existing content that you would assess to be able to create new messaging and these sort of things? So that's the first part of the question. And the second is like, are you interfacing with other stakeholders, other, let's say, roles? I know you've been working very closely with the product marketing team, but do they allow you to go around? Because sometimes you're going to need some, my understanding is you're going to need some insight, right, from some other stakeholders. And how did you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point that I would love to call out here. So, Shireen talked a lot about our initial onboarding phase and like talking to stakeholders. That was something that we asked the team to do for us. We kind of told them that, hey, we really need to get in touch with some of the people that will actually be using these assets. We find that if we're able to pull them in sooner, get their buy off as we're creating these assets, one, it results in, we actually get their feedback and that's necessary. But two, they actually go and use these assets because they know they're coming down the pipeline. So they put us in touch with a few critical sales team members. We met with them during the onboarding phase, let them know kind of who we were, what we were doing, and how that process was going to go, how we were going to pull in their feedback in different rounds of review, and what that would look like, what types of feedback we were looking for from them as well. Like are we looking for brand voice types of feedback, or is it comprehensive, or would they even use this? And so we kind of talked to them, got in touch with the right folks, and kind of pulled their voices in very early in the process, even from the onboarding. And then we had them review as kind of one of the last rounds of review after the piece had been reviewed by the product marketing team. After we had the approval from kind of our main stakeholders, we gave that kind of raw material, even just in a Google Doc, to the sales team and said, we gave them the context around the asset and said, this is one sheet that will be used in this type of context. Can you please review by next Wednesday? It will be replacing this asset, so please give us your feedback. And they were thrilled to be included in that process and very responsive. And that did definitely result in us getting some really great, insightful feedback around, this is not the way customers would say this, or, this is helpful and I see us prioritizing this, but I think we need to prioritize this value proposition over this one over here. Or, I was really expecting these slides to be more focused on this thing versus this thing, or here's my talk track that I use. It really, really was helpful to pull that feedback in and really eliminate some of that friction that I think we see when the product marketing team just rolls things out to the sales or account management or customer success teams. And the customer facing teams are like, what is this? How am I supposed to use it? This doesn't reflect my world. So it's just going to sit on the shelf and collect dust.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that, all of that's great. And I would just add, and maybe this leans into like a tip that I would provide others, is really think about like, who is your review team? Who is that core group? Because there's maybe 10 people that are in sales that would love to have a say on the asset. However, we don't have time to get 10 people's feedback, of course. So we obviously spoke to our main point of contact, and she headed up product marketing, and she helped us determine for each business unit who are the one or two people in sales that need to look at this? Who's the one person in product marketing? That's the key point of contact from the product marketing perspective. So we created like these small cohorts. And by having that, we just knew our review cycle goes to these 5 people. These 2 see it first, then we go to this person, then who gets the final sign off. And as like project managey that sounds like it's really important to just go through those steps so that it's smooth, and it's never perfect, but it's smooth, and everything flows on schedule.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, too many cooks in the kitchen can really muddy the waters. And I know there's always this conversation between sales and marketing, salespeople feeling like they are on the front lines and hearing sort of the latest stuff that's happening, and then marketing saying, "Hey, we're seeing things in a very strategic way," right? Plus triangulating that against all the other things that are going on with our story. So, I was going to ask you about how to run these effective review cycles with these particular stakeholders. I think you mentioned some pieces there at a high level. Any sort of like tips that you would give folks when dealing with the human element, meaning like, hey, we got to push back, like we have to consolidate, we have to have these
Yeah.
particular folks. And maybe if you do want to get, let's say, XYZ stakeholders insights from their perspective, it's got to come this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of tips around that?
Yeah, really, I'll add a couple and I'll have Megan jump in. I mean, one, we predominantly, I believe, did the review cycles async. Megan, I think that was like mostly true. However, that said, there were a couple salespeople I remember, especially one that was like, I need to do this live. Like, you need to get me on the phone, otherwise it's not going to happen. So you also have to be flexible. You can create these frameworks, but I think you also do flexible, and the human element you brought up, and everybody has their own style of how they want to provide feedback. So we had to do that. I know Megan did that with that person as needed. So that's one. And another tip I would say is, at the end of the day, you need a final sign off. Like, somebody needs to sign off from this. In this particular project, it was somebody in product marketing. So it was the heads of the leads of each business unit from the product marketing team. And they were the final kind of reviewer, looking at all the comments, helping us consolidate, giving us direction of like, which one do we lean into more? Which one is like, maybe not as critical to lean into that piece of feedback. So those are the 2 things I would say.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I want to just like double click on something that Shirin said, that we had a very specific framework that we put together, and we outlined the pieces of the process for them. Like I said, we had like a ClickUp board where we were sending them Loom videos every week to just show where everything was. And I think what Shirin and I both share is like, we want to have an outline. We want to give the clients a sense of clarity and security that we have the process handled. And we recognize that that process does need to change and flex, and we have to be flexible on our end as well. And so we are always very upfront with that with our clients, that this is the process ideally. However, we don't live in the ideal world, as we all know, and we're willing to be flexible within reason. We're always going to be, back to Shirin's point a little bit ago about being transparent. We're always going to be open and have those conversations with clients and say, hey, we're finding that this part of the process, getting feedback from this person or whatever is getting really sticky. Can you help us kind of navigate around that? What can we do? Is there someone else we can pull in? Do we need to approach that person in a different way? How can we kind of be flexible and make sure at all aspects of the process, we are prioritizing getting our clients really great work that works for both of us?
Shirin, a quick question about the point of view of non-full-time team members and the value that can really provide, because there are a lot of go-to-market leaders, CROs, CEOs that watch this show as well, and we're all trying to be more efficient, right? And we're trying to really, I hate to say it, but in many ways do more with less, right? And there's AI in the mix and all this kind of stuff, but there is a really unique perspective that someone who's coming in on a project basis or in a fractional capacity or whatnot can really have. Any sort of insights you would give folks around that?
Yeah, I think one I mentioned is the prioritization piece. So when you're bringing somebody in from the outside, no matter what the project is, when you have them for about 3 months, and let's say at most, usually maybe 20 hours a week at most per client, It's critical that we're very, very specific on what we're looking to deliver and what are the measurements of success. Like, what does the end of 3 months look like? I always ask prospective clients that. What would make you really happy at the end of these 3 months? And really listen to that and build that into our scope. So I would say that. And then as you said, the outside perspective, like just that, being able to review your messaging or your existing positioning and be able to poke holes, because we're not in it day to day. We're not looking at it all the time. So we're the new, fresh perspective that can say, this doesn't quite make sense for the category you play in, and you're talking about this. Or, these two the messaging you have for these two different buyers sound very similar. How are they really different? So just calling out things, I think from an outside perspective, we have that ability to do as well.
That really resonates with me as a founder for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're in the pool and you really can't see outside.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things that we really wanted to focus on with customer discovery calls. Now, we called it like customer discovery from the perspective of a founder, but I know as someone who's now talked to over 1,000 product marketers over the last year and worked with Justin, who's, as you know, a former product marketer, like it's something that product marketers do all the time. And I think that as a founder, and this might also be something that maybe C-level leadership kind of falls victim to, is like, number one, you're emotionally biased, right,
Mhm.
towards this thing being valuable, or you had a vision. You're like, this is my vision, like, especially early stage, y'all know,
Mhm.
right? Like, this is my vision, like, I can't deviate from this. And the bottom line is the vision might not be as it was when you developed
Yeah.
it resonating with the market,
Yeah.
right?
And the
So,
market changes.
and it changes, absolutely. I mean, we see that all the time now, right? Or
Mhm.
even over the last almost 2 years. And so that really resonates with me, being able to like have an outside perspective, and
Mhm.
that's why we continue to do it. Let me tell you, do we learn new things? Yes, we do, not as much as when we were starting off, right? Now that we've
Mhm.
done, but um there are reminders, and then there are also perspectives that we didn't keep in, or that we didn't sort of have, early on,
Mhm.
that we have to take into account, and we're constantly challenging. So I think that being able to have that third party view to come in, that's not going to be biased,
Yeah.
they want to win, right? Like, you're going
Mhm.
to come in and want to have great outcomes for your clients. So there is no bias to like not tell them the truth, right? Where
Mhm.
internally, sometimes
Yeah.
people might just phone it in because they don't want to cause controversy, right?
Yeah. I mean, even that, I've worked with clients where I will push back on something and the founder's just adamant about including something, and will push back. And then you sometimes have to. I mean, it is their business at the end of the day. And if they're
Mm.
really passionate about something that maybe we didn't hear in discovery, and it's not something we're hearing that we want to lean into too much in our messaging, but they really believe it and it's their baby at the end of the day, I've included it in there. But it's not the only thing we talk about. But I say, okay, that makes sense. This is your thing. You know it best as far as like from the product perspective. And so there's a little bit of a balance there too.
That really gets me too, because I think there's a distinction between what the market understands, what you're solving, and what you might internally believe you're solving, or even the way that the language is. And sometimes I've worked with so many, outside of being a founder myself, like I've worked with so many founders over the years, where sometimes there's even conflict, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, no, we have our vision. We have, again, I know I touched on that, but like, we have a certain story that we want to tell, and we're just focused on that. And then it's like, yeah, but you have to listen to the customer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have to use the customer's voice, at least in my opinion. And maybe
Yeah.
that's just how I'm
No, I
wired.
agree 100%. Yeah.
Megan, any thoughts around how to maybe, as we conclude here, influence your client, and maybe if you're in house, a way that you can influence that difficult or challenging leader within the organization to accept that, hey, you know what, we have to be more flexible with our perspective. We have to try to really truly meet in the middle here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, we've all been there, especially if you've worked in a startup. I mentioned at the beginning that I was the first head of product marketing into a couple different startups. And one of the most critical things that they brought me in to do was to redo the messaging and positioning. And that deals a lot with sitting directly with the founder and asking them about their vision. And the best way that I've found to kind of influence them, and it's not foolproof, obviously, because nothing is to provide them with actual data. And that's why I think it's so important that product marketers are constantly talking to customers, constantly out in the market, constantly hearing things. I always say that one of the best marks of a good product marketing team is that, your product marketer kind of like magically knows everything. Product is having a delay, product marketing knows. Sales is worried about meeting their target, product marketing knows. Something starting to come up in customer calls, product marketing knows. And so, if you can't talk to customers, you're listening to gong calls, you're reviewing the data, you're looking at closed won, closed lost reasons, you're going to industry events, constantly having your finger on the pulse and being able to come into those meetings with a founder with actual data that says this keyword or this term or this topic has come up in customer calls 100 times over the past month. I would really love for us to at least try including it. Can we run a little bit of a beta test here? Can I pick one salesperson? Can we run a little bit of a test? Can I come back to you in 30 days? If you're right, I'm happy to let you be right. But if I'm right, let's just kind of give it a little bit of a test here. So data combined with let's just test it, not putting kind of like a final bow on anything at any point, has been really helpful to me.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap up with some key takeaways that y'all really were able to pull that really stood out from this project with Grammarly.
I'll go first. Yeah. So I think the thing that I learned is, or takeaways that I'd love to share with people is the thing that I mentioned earlier. Having really good intentions and a really clear process combined with the willingness to be flexible at certain points. The second thing that kind of goes along with that I also kind of talked about and Shirin talked about as well, is the willingness to have kind of these open conversations all along the way, never letting the process kind of get so messed up that we're 3 months in and just now realizing that we're not going to meet any of our targets, constantly being on top of that. And I think the third thing is that great deliverables are, it's not just about the writing of those deliverables. It's not just about hiring someone who can put words on a page or putting it through an AI model. It's about the preparation. It's about the discovery. It's about understanding the customer, being able to tease apart kind of the nuances of how customers want to be spoken to. It's about understanding and teasing apart the nuances of how, we can coordinate with the sales team and understand their feedback and include all of that in this deliverable. So yeah, those would be kind of the three things I'd include.
Awesome. Shirin, why don't you take us home?
All right. No pressure. The two that I would probably say or add to that is discovery phase. Take your time to do that. 2 to 3 weeks is okay. It just sets you up for success. And then the last one I will say is the review. Establish what your feedback and review cycle is upfront. First, work with your main point of contact. Every client engagement, we have typically one main point of contact. Speak to them about that. Who needs to be involved at which stage of this project? And communicate that with them. Like, you are part of this core team now. You're going to be part of the review cycle. We're kicking off this work, and just include them as much as you can. But establish a process for it is my tip. Don't just kind of go at it ad hoc as you go through the project.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your insights and sharing how you helped Grammarly. We all love Grammarly. I just saw them at Inbound, right? Last week in Boston. If folks wanted to get in contact with you, maybe collectively or as individuals to do work, because they all work with each other so much, what are the best channels or URLs or other methods to reach you?
You're going to have to call my secretary. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have a secretary. No, LinkedIn is probably the best place. It's just looking me up on LinkedIn would be awesome.
Yep. Yeah, same here. Shireen and I work together on a lot of projects. We work separately on a lot of projects. We share a lot of content together. We share content separately. So if you follow both of us, you'll get the full gamut of everything.
And real quick, if there are like 2 or 3 things that go to market teams out there, heads of product marketing out there who need help could really sort of experience working with y'all, what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the big buckets from my end, at least positioning and messaging work. I would say sales enablement, and then I would say content. Those are probably the biggest that I've seen kind of prospective clients come to me for.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And one of the things I love about y'all is that you actually like do the strategic work, but
mhm,
you'll also do the tactical deliverables as well. So
Yeah.
yep,
that's
exactly.
so awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.